Hello and welcome. My name is Andrew Richard Albanese, and I'm a senior writer at Publishers Weekly. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the third installment of our Live from the Library Lounge webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking politics, specifically the legislative and advocacy landscape, after what's been a fairly contentious election and a fairly contentious 4 years. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors for making today's discussion possible. We have three today: C&T Publishing, your home for creativity; Rowman and Littlefield; and Legendary Comics. And in addition to sponsoring today's talk, each sponsor is going to be doing a giveaway, with each sponsor picking one of our registered attendees to receive a book bundle of recent titles. You don't have to do anything. Winners will be notified after the event today. I just want to thank our sponsors again, C&T Publishing, Rowman and Littlefield, and Legendary Comics, for making today's discussion possible, for the giveaway, and thank you most of all for supporting America's libraries. So those of you who signed up early for this webinar know that we had to move the session from the week of Thanksgiving until today. We had a scheduling conflict. So first off, I want to thank you who signed up early for your forbearance with that change. But also, as fun as it would have been to warm up for Thanksgiving with a little political talk, I think this timing actually feels a little better because yesterday was a bit of a day. We saw the first COVID-19 vaccines actually get into the arms of Americans, so some light at the end of the tunnel in this tragic pandemic. Today, we learned that the Moderna vaccine is also pretty much set for FDA emergency approval. And of course, yesterday, the Electoral College made it official, casting its votes for Joe Biden, President-elect Joe Biden, and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. But at the same time, we have a long way to go as a country. This week, we also hit a grim milestone. 300,000 Americans have died from COVID-19. And yesterday, we notched more than 233,000 new infections. So I'm not going to try to get in trouble here, and I'm not going to try to sound overly partisan or anything. I'm just going to say that the last 4 years, I think they've been hard. The last year of the pandemic especially, my heart breaks for the families who are not going to have their loved ones with them for this holiday season and beyond. During this scary new COVID-19 spike, I'm worrying about the workers who are out there, including library workers, people who may have lost their jobs, their economic security, their health insurance, or worse, their lives. I worry for the kids like my own, and what this year of remote education has done and how they're learning how to fear, like hugs and playing with their friends. And I admit I still worry for the country because virtually every institution that our country depends on has come under attack in the last 4 years. Science and expertise and the free press, the vote, sometimes even truth itself. We have big issues that we need to deal with as a nation. But how do we begin to talk about these big issues if we're not even recognizing the same reality? But change is on the way. We have new leadership coming in January, a new administration, a new Congress, new legislators in state houses nationwide, and a chance for change and a chance for progress. In our September webinar, University of South Carolina professor David Lenkus pointed out why libraries and librarians are going to be so important to our nation's recovery. Because virtually every challenge we face, he said, the pandemic, the disparities in racism and systemic inequality, virtually every crack in our response to these issues has a knowledge component. So today we're going to talk about what this new political landscape coming in 2021 might mean for librarians and libraries. We're also going to have a special guest spot with Veranda Pitchford from Khalifa, who's going to talk about an IMLS grant program she's got up and running. And I'm delighted to point out that when it comes to advocating on behalf of libraries, which in effect is lobbying on behalf of the public, the library community, the ALA, they got some game. They're pretty good at it. And I'm happy today to have two people with us who are doing the work. And with that, I'll introduce our panel. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Kathy Cromer, the ALA's Associate Executive Director for Public Policy and Advocacy. And she's joining us on a day where her phone is surely blowing up with updates on key legislation. Kathy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrew.
And John Kraska, who is the founder and executive director of Every Library, which is the nation's only PAC, super PAC, shall we say, working on behalf of libraries. John, thank you for joining us today.
Always nice to be here, Andrew. Thank you.
So I thought I'd start just by, giving you a chance to expand on your bios and your work and who you are a little bit. Tell us a little bit more about, the work that you do. Kathy, do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today. The American Library Association's Public Policy and Advocacy Office is located in Washington, D.C. Most of our team is here, but we actually do have team members that are located in our Chicago headquarters office. For 75 years, ALA has been the voice of America's libraries in Washington, D.C. That is a long and distinguished history that precedes all of us here on the call. We have staff that are government relations experts that have well over 75 years of combined experience working in policy and advocacy at the federal and state level. We've got folks that have worked in the House, the Senate, and the administration, as well as for other large national advocacy organizations. ALA is classified as a 501c3 by the IRS, so a small portion of our budget can be used for lobbying, but we are not a political action committee. We do not raise money to influence elections or advocate for library ballot initiatives, and that's what makes our work so different from John's.
Great. John, your turn. Give us a little background on yourself and what you do.
Absolutely. So Every Library is a super PAC for libraries. It is a 501c4, and there's a big difference between a 4 and a 3, as Kathy said. The 501c4 does raise and expend money to work on ballot measures and other legislative initiatives. We're set up in a way that is trying to focus on the funding formula for libraries, whether it's public libraries, where we've done 115 election days for public libraries. We just notched up on November 3rd, our 97th win. The public library ballot initiatives are a major funding component for library districts and some city and county and town or township or borough or parish-based libraries. We also work on negotiations for city council for public libraries with those city councils if they are the primary funding partner, or county governments, etc. Through our school library portfolio, we also work on Save School Librarians. That's our digital site, saveschoollibrarians.org, where we're focusing on the conversation with school boards, superintendents' offices, administration, on behalf of the school librarian, oftentimes, unfortunately, when there's a crisis in the field. But again, it's focused on the funding formula for the programs, effective school library programs that are addressing right now the COVID slide in very significant ways. And so our work touches on those local libraries as our partners, state library associations, and other national issues of concern for the profession in our sector.
Great. Kathy, I'm going to start with you today. I'm going to start by taking a little bit of a look back, because you're a veteran doing advocacy work in Washington. You came to ALA with a strong resume. You started in 2017, which is the same time that the Trump administration started. And I remember asking you in an interview last year what the first 2 years were like, because I mean, the politics of the Trump administration have just been so unusual. I mean, all the political norms and sort of the advocacy playbooks of old, they had to sort of go out the window, right? So, now that you've been in the job for the full term, give us a sense of what the last 4 years has been like for somebody who's advocating for libraries in Washington. Did you feel like you ever got the ear of someone on the Hill who knew how to get something done or had an interest in getting something done?
Oh, yes, Andrew, I remember that conversation with you very well. And the fact that libraries were up against proposals to eliminate our agency 4 years in a row, I think that speaks for itself. Adversity can break you or it can galvanize you. And I have seen library advocates galvanize in the last 3.5 years that I have been with the American Library Association. Has it been easy? No, but it never is. No matter what party is in power in Congress or the White House, it's a challenge. And advocates, no matter the cause, have got to stay at the table to get their piece of the pie. Library advocates did not let these challenges the past 4 years break them. They rallied and they won. Just to mention a few of the things that I can think of that we were successful in, the Museum and Library Services Act, that was reauthorized through 2025. We increased funding for IMLS by $26 million over the past 5 years, despite the administration proposing elimination every year. We won $50 million in relief funding in March. We had a $2 billion Library Stabilization Fund Act introduced in the Senate and the House this summer. Last night, we learned that IMLS is currently in the Senate relief package proposal to receive $200 million for broadband expansion and connected devices. School libraries became eligible for Title IV Part A funding of the Every Student Succeeds Act. And we also got Crosby Kemper from the Kansas City Public Library. He was confirmed by the Senate to be the new director of IMLS. So I think library advocates did pretty well despite all the challenges these past years.
Indeed, and we're gonna come back and talk about IMLS in a little bit. But I have to ask you, now that there's a Biden administration coming in, how much do you expect things to sort of get back to normal politically in terms of some of the way things work? We saw 106 members of Congress sign on to a lawsuit, to sort of overturn the election. So that suggests to me that things aren't going to get back to normal overnight. But what do you think? Are we going to sort of get back to, shall we say, the norms of Washington?
Well, Andrew, norms? I don't know. Political or otherwise, nothing has been normal after 2020. But based on the folks that we have seen the president-elect put forth for key positions in his administration, those are mostly people that have served in government or have worked with him in the past. I would expect that things are going to get a little bit more predictable in the future. And you mentioned regulatory agencies. I'll share a little bit of insight of what we're hearing here in DC. Everybody is saying that the current FCC commissioner, Jessica Rosenworcel, will be the acting chair and possibly the chair. And as you know, she is very pro-education, pro-library, and the homework gap is her signature issue. However, you need to remember, as of Inauguration Day, the FCC will be 2-2. We've got 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. The 5th commissioner would need to be nominated by Biden and confirmed by the Senate. And if Republicans keep control of the Senate, some speculate that Senator McConnell could delay the confirmation for a while and keep the deadlock at the agency.
So librarians in Georgia, you might want to take note of that last part. One more general question. We're going to get to start talking about some specific issues in a moment, but I've heard a lot from librarians about this, and you've spoken quite a bit about the importance of year-round advocacy at every level of government, local, state, and federal. But I get the sense that people are just exhausted by the last 4 years. Getting Trump out of office, getting a new administration to come in, for many people, that was a heavy lift. As much as we might want to be taking a breath right now, is this the time to really engage more, to sort of put our foot on the gas and really push for libraries and schools?
Absolutely. The last 4 years have been exhausting for everyone, even before the pandemic hit. We understand that library workers are exhausted. My team is exhausted. I think they're exhausted of me. But I have to say, my experience, advocacy is exhausting because advocates can never take anything for granted. Effective advocates must engage year-round with elected officials. We just can't show up when we need something. Whenever I'm feeling exhausted, I take a deep breath and I think of what we've actually accomplished so far. One of the major wins for libraries that is particularly inspiring to me is that the Marrakesh Treaty was finally signed into law in 2018. ALA worked with a coalition of partners for more than a decade to get the treaty signed into law. That is a lot of conversations, a lot of moving forward, a lot of moving backward. And I would have to say, because of our persistence, countless people with print disabilities around the world have accessible reading materials. The Marrakesh Treaty is a case in point. Success takes long-term commitment, no matter who's in the White House or who's controlling Congress. Everybody wants a quick win. We want everything instantly these days. But real change, it takes time, and it takes relationship building, and it takes listening, it takes negotiating. The American Library Association has been on Capitol Hill for 75 years, not just to be the voice for libraries, but to listen for libraries. Where do libraries need to be at the table? What do we need to defend? Are there opportunities out there that we need to be involved in? So ALA is a voice as well as an ear on Capitol Hill. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention ALA's strong network of chapters that we have at the states. They pool their best experience and intelligence available in the library community to address state and local concerns. At the end of the day, libraries have to tell their own stories. And I have never met a single librarian who doesn't have a compelling story to tell. I hope that we can find one that will share those stories with their new members of Congress and help make a difference with those decision makers that are in power.
Great. John Kraska.
Yes, sir.
So the national stuff tends to get a lot of the headlines, but as the saying goes, all politics is local, and that's certainly true for libraries. At every library, you do a lot of work at the local level with ballot initiatives. Tell us a little bit about how this election season went for libraries at the local level.
My heart goes out to the folks in Ohio who were on the ballot back in March when the governor's order came through and delayed the actual election day up by several weeks. There was dozens of libraries that were on the ballot there, including 2 that we were backing directly, who didn't know. And in the last couple of weeks, leading up to this conversation and yesterday's vote in the Electoral College, when your funding formula is suspended for all intents and purposes, it's a traumatic kind of time to be involved in library leadership. The landscape this year for libraries on the ballot has been good for renewals. Renewals always come in somewhere 9 out of 10 renewals for library funding pass. But we saw 2 things happen this year that were very dynamic for libraries on the ballot. One is that a lot of people chose not to go if they didn't have to go to the ballot. We only saw about half as many elections in 2020 as we saw in 2018, 2016 on average. The success rate for renewals was still very high, but the success rate for new money, for people who were looking to build the new building, to set up the new wing, to bring in collections that support the community, to add to staffing, that was, it was probably about 6 out of 10 that passed this time around. Normally, it's a little bit higher than that. We tend to work with folks who are in certain circumstances as well. We tend to work very closely, and when I said before about 115 election days, those are all folks that we've spent some significant time where we can feel like we have contributed to their success or are part of it not working for them. The folks that we work with who were in particularly challenging spots this year, I got to be honest with you, Andrew, we had long and hard conversations with folks to say, perhaps 2021 might be a better option for you than a very noisy election cycle this year. It wasn't about who was at the top of the ticket specifically. Red states and blue states support their local libraries on their renewals. Red states and blue states, red towns and blue towns have to have a big discussion about where is the money going to go and who's going to spend the money, especially with new projects. But it's a very noisy time this year. And so the deep, hard, leadership-focused conversation that says, let's look at 2021, perhaps even look at 2022, when we understand more about where the library fits in terms of the priorities of the community coming through COVID, let alone what was at the top of the ticket. The priorities around how does the community want to take care of each other, support different populations, be involved in not just a pride-filled place, which I think is really important, but also how do we address the big problems. In some places, COVID has been a medical and an economic situation. In other places, COVID has caused economic dislocations without as many health and medical complications, and everybody's suffering through it together. How does the library, how does a public library, how does a school library program that's properly staffed with a certified school librarian solve some of those challenges, address some of those concerns, and even in a lot of ways touch on the fears that we are having coming through, like you said at the beginning, perhaps towards the light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, clearly the pandemic has had a major influence on things this year. And I know it's early. We haven't even seated a new Congress yet. We haven't had the inauguration yet, but is it too early to start thinking about 2022? Do you have any thoughts about how that's looking, John? Are you starting to strategize a little?
Well, 2021, 2022 are dynamic periods for. There's an old adage from President Kennedy that says, in between elections is when you build the party. And we'd like to see the library party be built in between these next set of big national elections. The Library Party at the local level, its wards and its precincts, it is walking your precinct back when that's legal again. To be able to be seen as the librarians out there in the world doing change that people care to see happen. In a lot of ways, we look at the librarian as candidate, and we look at this opportunity between 2021, 2022 as base building for that candidate. What have you done yesterday to help people during COVID? What did you do before COVID in order to move the community forward? What are your plans tomorrow in order to bring us together in that very unique way that libraries have as a transformational community anchor institution? I'm not necessarily as concerned about November 2022 at this point as I am about getting through the spring elections, the state and municipal off cycles in 2021. There's certain key gubernatorial races that need to be really leaned into on the part of the library community. Even I think your hometown, New York's got a mayoral election coming up. How does that impact education? How does that impact the way that the libraries work across the boroughs? These local races are where we're really looking to lean into.
Yeah, we have about 600 candidates for mayor in New York City so far, it seems. Very briefly, I just want to ask you to weigh in on the last question that I asked Kathy, which is the idea of exhaustion with politics. Are you seeing any of that with the libraries you're working with?
There's another Kennedy adage that I love. It's defeat has a thousand fathers. I'm sorry, victory has 1,000 fathers. Defeat is an orphan. I think that there's something to be said for folks who have taken some sort of an affirmative action on the part of the issues that they believe in and the value system that they hold dear, to take a deep breath for a couple of days and then get back into it. What we saw before the Trump administration in Washington, for example, with the framework that came out of then Representative oh gosh, I just drew Paul Ryan. Thank you, former Speaker of the House. He was chair of the House Budget Committee. They wanted to target IMLS back then. There's a whole cloth approach to certain political philosophies that are resident in city councils. They're resident in county commissions. There's a few of them on library boards too. So anybody who's been working on a framework that says we should be taxing ourselves progressively to fund the common good, and we should be looking at ways to lean into access and equity. Yeah, let's take it. I don't think it's a time for a victory lap, though. I think it's another deep breath.
Right. Kathy, I'm sure your phone has been blowing up as we've been having this discussion so far. We're talking onto some specific legislative issues here. We're talking about a relief bill still, and that's changed just since the ALA issued its last advocacy alert. Tell us where things stand today with a COVID relief package, how that's changed, where libraries fit in, and what you're working towards.
Sure. Well, ALA has been working with the Hill all year long to make sure that libraries are included in any relief funding that comes forward. Yesterday afternoon, there was a bipartisan group of senators that proposed a $908 billion relief package. It's called the Emergency Coronavirus Relief Act of 2020. Of the billions of dollars designated in this package for broadband, $200 million would go directly to IMLS for broadband and connected devices, and that would be distributed out to each state, and they would receive $1.6 million. And at ALA's urging, the bill has been modified to allow greater flexibility for states to spend this money. We realize every situation is a little different, needs vary state to state. The proposal also includes a $3 billion emergency education connectivity fund, and this would provide E-rate support for hotspots and connected devices. Libraries would be eligible to apply for the funding, including tribal libraries. And there's also $82 billion for K-12 and higher education funding in this proposal. School and academic libraries would be able to make the case within their administrations for funding. And the relief package also includes $160 billion for community stabilization, which could help alleviate some of the fiscal pressure on states and help avert cuts to local library and education programs. However, I want to stress this is not a done deal. This package could fall apart just as quickly as it came together, but there is tremendous pressure for Congress to do something before the end of the year.
Well, I'm going to ask you to put your advocacy hat on right now and tell us, what do we need to do? What do librarians watching us today, how can they help?
So library advocates should be contacting their members of Congress. We have an action alert up on the ALA website that if they haven't taken action, they can reach out immediately and make sure that Congress knows libraries need to be part of this relief package. They're negotiating right now, so it would be really timely to call or email and let them know what's going on in your community and how making sure that we get funding in this relief package could help you. There's very different needs, again, state to state, and they need to understand that libraries on the ground have to have flexibility in order to effectively help their communities. And I'd also tell people to prepare because this is not over. We're going to be focused on COVID in the new year as well.
So $160 billion for community stabilization. It's just a step, a belated one, I would say. John, we've talked about this over recent months. States and local municipalities, they're going to need federal funds if they're going to get through this. Talk to us a little bit about the revenue crisis that's brewing for states and municipalities. What are you hearing on the ground?
Sure. So first off, what we're hearing on the ground comes from folks like Standard & Poor's and Moody's, where property tax receipts are still looking pretty stable. Unlike the Great Recession of 2010 and the Great Crisis then when the housing market collapsed, God forbid. But right now, any library that is running primarily on property taxes is probably in a more stable situation than their colleagues who are part of a city or a county or another municipal entity where there is some instability about sales tax receipts, use tax, gas tax, hotel tax. There's a lot of different fees and structures at the local level. And there's a number of different issues, of course, affecting the way that people are shopping, traveling. Income taxes during a time of sincere and severe unemployment dislocation are, of course, the receipts are less. Depending on how things are going to rebound for the retail community, will tell what quarter we're going to see some positives. States that are heavily reliant on energy production, gas or oil, are really taking a hit right now in terms of their general funds as well. Even things as esoteric as lottery in some places and casino revenue, because here in my home state of Illinois, casinos have been closed and opened and closed and opened. I mean, the whole matrix of that funding picture for any library that is a city or county or municipal entity or is a nonprofit even, that's working under contract, that's where I'm extremely nervous for. The property tax environment is not the only source of revenue for local libraries that rely primarily on it either. There's often a state funding component as well, state aid, grant programs that provide for capacity building or new projects. The whole matrix, there's a bit of a feeling of like, when's the other shoe going to drop? The relief for states and municipalities, in our estimation, is absolutely key to the health and well-being and the stability of the library community. And that goes on the education side as well. We've got the National Governors Association is asking for a $500 billion fund to stabilize education and stabilize state funding in order to smooth these problems over until the tax receipts pick back up. And we know very clearly that in a downtime for municipalities, when there's a lot of stress on health, on well-being, and on infrastructure, the libraries are going to get called on more than ever. We saw it in the last recession, of course. People just from all walks of life coming in off the street to say, I'd rather borrow it than buy it. I need this library for the dislocation I'm experiencing for my job, for my business. We need a policy framework at the state level, the local level, and the federal level that says that libraries are not just nice to haves, but essential to haves.
Right. So, Kathy, you mentioned the IMLS at the top of our conversation. And indeed, the Trump administration have proposed for 4 straight years to do away with the agency. I think we could reasonably expect that the Biden administration is not going to be presenting an existential crisis for the IMLS going forward. You correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'd like both you and John to weigh in on this question. What is next for IMLS now? Clearly, they could play a bigger role here in pandemic relief, right? Especially with when it comes to digital stuff. But what I'm hearing from political observers is that it's funny how the GOP always seems to discover their inner deficit hawk when a Democrat is in the White House. So even though we might not be facing the prospect of an elimination, is it going to be harder for IMLS to get funding? I mean, what are we expecting in a Biden-Harris administration?
Well, take that one first. I think that we will probably not see a proposal to actually eliminate the agency. But I think when you look at what IMLS has done, especially under Crosby Kemper's leadership during this pandemic, they've moved forward with the Realm project, which is providing scientific evidence to librarians to best make decisions on the materials they use and handle every day to make sure that their staff and their patrons are kept as safe as possible. I think they've done a fantastic job with that. And part of the seed money for that came from the CARES Act, which folks advocated for. So it's nice to be able to see that your advocacy has a direct result immediately. And I also know that they've really stepped up their interagency coordination, and they're working with other federal agencies. They've held webinars to help libraries apply for loans, the PPP program, and things like that. And they continue to do that type of outreach and making sure that libraries are accessing all the federal resources they have, and they're coordinated there. I think that, we will see some changes probably as we move forward. We won't be quite on the defensive as much, but I still think that advocates can't take anything for granted. We're fighting stiff competition, and when you look at the package that we're rolled up in the Labor, Health, and Human Services bundle, we're going to be competing with a lot of folks that need COVID relief. So it's going to be even more important for our advocates to get in there now and start reminding their legislators about the value they provide in their community and how we're adapting and changing to meet the needs of the community throughout the pandemic. But I'm optimistic.
John, you want to weigh in on the future of the IMLS here?
Well, from what I've seen, the opportunity to support IMLS is central and core to any library advocacy conversation. The work that needs to be done in order to support the chief officers of state library agencies, the folks who put a lot of that money to work directly in the states, they have a sincere interest in seeing $1 per capita be their funding request, and to have a floor for state libraries to receive aid from IMLS. It makes a lot of sense to me that we take a look at where the chief officers are looking to spend the money and put it to work, not necessarily during these relief times, but in terms of, well, how do libraries do some stimulus work as well. The IMLS leadership right now is also focused on what the health of the museum community looks like. And I think that part of the whole cloth approach that we have to libraries, archives, and museums is resident in how IMLS is structured. We look at it from every library's perspective as the Grants to States program, LSTA, funding for libraries, and what happens with the museum's office. When we're talking to folks around the country who care about the issues, they care about it in a very comprehensive kind of way. And we like to be able to continue to focus on who's putting the money to work as the advocates that we're, the originators of the requests that we're looking to put our weight behind.
Great. So I'm going to try to sneak in one more quick question here, even though it may not be quite so quick, before I get to Veranda Pitchford and an IMLS program that she's working on. And that's that the pandemic has shown us the need for a national broadband strategy. We're sorely lacking a national broadband strategy. What does that look like? I want each of you to sort of weigh in briefly. How do we get that, and what do you envision for that going forward? Kathy.
Sure. We have already been in meetings with the Biden-Harris transition team to talk about national broadband strategy as well as other initiatives that are a top priority at the FCC. I think that, we will see a lot of interest in this from a wide range of members of Congress. And so we have been doing outreach not only on the Hill as well as with the incoming administration to best position libraries and to make sure that people realize realize what a valuable role they play in their communities as anchor institutions and how we can really help solve the problem. So it's something that we have been working on already, Andrew.
Great. John, people at library parking lots using the Wi-Fi is not a strategy, is it?
It's a local hero story, and it's a national tragedy, Andrew. I mean, to see somebody out there doing that, yes, it's wonderful that we were able to goose up the bandwidth, but are we enough of us applying for E-rate? It's wonderful that we were able to deliver something in a tent, but really, how do we solve the problem for somebody who's got a small business that is open? They're all wearing masks, and we need to be able to help deliver, as a library, some business supports to them as well. We're going to see more need for telehealth. We're going to see more need for remote support for non-traditional education. We're going to see more situations where that pipe, the big pipe to the library, is part of a broader ecosystem of issues. So the national strategy approach has to be comprehensive across education, of course, but business development and economic supports, health and well-being, and that thing that we've been missing the most in some of our Zoom meetings, it's a little impersonal. How do we use this new technology? How do we use a robust broadband policy to build community anew? We have been isolated in so many different ways, and I'd like to see us as libraries lean in, not just from a technology perspective, but programmatically as well.
Great. Well, this is a perfect time for us to talk. We just spoke about IMLS a little bit, and I wanted to highlight for you one IMLS program that's in the pipeline. I spoke with Khalifa's Veranda Pitchford earlier this week about a pilot project that's set to deliver training modules to librarians. It's called Libraries as Second Responders. So let's take a quick look at this video, and then we'll talk about it on the other side. If I can get Rob, you want to start that video for us? Hi, Andrew Albanese here from Publishers Weekly, coming to you from the home office, my home office here in New York City. Today we'll be joined by Veranda Pitchford, the Assistant Director at the Khalifa Group, to talk about a new grant-funded program designed to help librarians cope with the new roles and new realities that libraries are going to face in the age of COVID-19. Now, as many of you already know, the Khalifa Group is a nonprofit, California-based library membership consortium. Numbers more than 230 libraries of all sizes and types. They do a lot of national work. It's not all California-based, and they do great work on behalf of the library community. And the program that we're going to talk about today involves a new forthcoming initiative to address libraries as second responders. Now, the term second responder is how we often describe the teams that are responsible for cleaning up sites during and after an event or a crisis that requires first responders. Well, second responders are the people that help people get their lives and their work back on track. And public libraries, of course, have done great work in adapting their services during the COVID-19 crisis, but I think it's clear, even with a successful vaccine on the way, that we're just not going to flip a switch and go back to our pre-COVID past. So how do libraries prepare for what the future may demand of them? Let's ask Veranda Pitchford, who's leading the Libraries as Second Responders program for the Khalifa Group. Veranda, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. It's awesome to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, let's start here. We've had a few conversations about the Libraries as Second Responders program as it was ramping up in recent months. And one of the things that always stood out to me is something that we've talked about even on this podcast, or webinar in the past. And that's the idea that libraries need to prepare for a new normal to respond to their community's needs. So broadly speaking, what are some of the questions facing libraries that you hope that this program, the Libraries as Second Responders program, can help address?
Well, I think as many people are saying now, the libraries that were closed during the pandemic are not the same libraries that will reopen when that time comes, or even that we're reopening now during the pandemic. Things will shift, new services will arise. So I think a lot of the questions we'll be asking ourselves is, how do we continue to serve that whole person in researching the role of first responders and second responders and learning a little bit more about that, and how social workers, et cetera, react in those settings. It's about serving the whole person, not just the immediate need they have, the transactional need. It's about how do we serve the whole person? How do we learn what the whole person needs? Specifically, and even to drill a little deeper, how can libraries strategically plug into the network of organizations in their communities working hard to serve highly vulnerable COVID impacted communities? I think that would be a big piece of it. As we find a new normal, communities we serve are finding a new normal, and who are we and how do we meet who they are at that point?
So the COVID-19 crisis, of course, has hit during a particularly fractious period in our history. We're talking about politics and policy on our webinar today, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and speak personally. I think it's fair to say that the Trump administration has not really done a very good job putting together a comprehensive national plan to fight COVID-19. Not only that, it has, and it still is, sort of undermining a lot of trust in government. It's undermining trust in science and in expertise. I mean, wearing a mask has become political. Dr. Anthony Fauci needs a security detail.
Yeah.
So the question I want to ask you is, can public libraries help cut through that kind of noise and make a difference? Because we're going to need the services that library offer. Are we not?
Definitely. And, it's Pew has reported it. And any librarian listening to this will know that libraries remain one of the most trusted parts of local government. As our friends in DMV and other parts, local and state government, people come to us not only with their information needs, but their life needs. So as a trusted form of local government, I think we can leverage that to play a huge role. And I would say that kind of where we are in this time in our country with racial unrest, political unrest, and unfortunately, health fact unrest has created this huge chasm between factions. And I would say it started before COVID. Frankly, I think it started with the election of Trump as people split in their beliefs, and there's just a chasm between us. I think libraries have a big role in using that trust to support communities in coming together. Now, I'm sure some libraries out there are expanding when we think of EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion in our libraries, when we think of staffing, when we think of our collections. I'm sure lots of libraries out there are thinking of how do we do this, create and infuse anti-bias training and education into our programs, not just for kids as young as 3, but with families. How can families come together who are already coming together at the library, work to learn how to make help their kids do the next best thing to make the world a better place and to bring us together, as well as themselves, just as an example.
Well, it's a great point that COVID-19 is not the only challenge that we're facing. In 2020, the nation is in the midst of a long overdue racial and social justice awakening. And what strikes me about the Library's Second Responders program is that it seeks to apply a race, equity, and inclusion lens on library services and COVID-19 services, especially on the needs of vulnerable communities. Can you talk a little bit about why that's important?
Sure. I want to add the hugest caveat in the world because yes, I definitely believe, and I know, again, a lot of our great colleagues are doing this, applying that race equity lens. But what I want to say about it is I want to be sure to honor and make it very clear and articulate the intersectionality that comes along with that. Obviously, we're talking about LGBTQIA+ issues. We're talking about accessibility issues. We're talking about neurodivergence. And that race equity lens is all a part of that. And the race equity lens as it relates to COVID is specifically because statistically, people of color are the largest group hit by COVID. And I recently, with that being said, and with that being the focus of this grant, recently I was read someone said, the one thing we need to do is talk to the people who are closest to the problem. And by getting closest to the problem, we can find the solution. So I think that race equity lens, makes the world a better place, and kind of back to the previous question of bringing us together to understand each other. So that's where I think we could do is use that race equity lens to go a little deeper and serve those who are most needed and learn more how to get at a solution for all of this, for the racial injustice issues, as well as this chasm that's created.
Okay, details time.
Ooh.
How will the Libraries of Second Responders project help? Specifically, what is this project going to deliver, and what's the timeline on this?
I don't know why I was so scared when you said the word details, but this is who I am. First of all, the Libraries of Second Responders program, which I neglected to mention initially, is funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, a federal agency serving libraries and museums, and we're very grateful for that. My organization, Khalifa, for which I work, has a training arm called Info People, and it's a national online training arm with instructional designers to help experts design training for optimum learning. We are going to work together with an advisory group of first responders and second responders. So we're hoping to have social workers. I'm in conversation with them now. Social workers, people in public health, people who are working with community-based organizations, serving vulnerable population, of course, library folks from all walks of life, working together to co-create content for recorded modules to train librarians how to, and library people, not just librarians, library people on how to find out what the needs are in their community. What we want to have here is a model in which we can assess, just as a first responder gets to a site in life-saving mode and assesses what's important, what needs to be priority done first, etc. In that second responder role, we have strategy to respond and plug into the network of other second responders and serve folks. And it unfortunately will hopefully work in other crises down the road. And I say unfortunately because there will be other crises down the road. So this will be recorded online training available at any time, along with very short micro learnings that be about 5 minutes that are shareable, that people can have access to whenever and whatever they need. The modules will be released starting in late spring of 2021, and we'll continue to release them every quarter throughout 2021. And we'll be looking for feedback from the library community along with other communities as to how it's going, how it's resonating with them. Built into the program, we do have a group of folks outside of advisory called the end user reviewers. So there'll be frontline people as subject matter expertise works with an instructional designer, reacting to the content to see how it could be applicable in their library setting, so that we're sure to hit the right target in terms of what libraries need from these groups. So they'll be helping to give feedback, to keep reiterating the content to make it better and better before it's recorded. And there'll be resources involved in that too, meaning key websites, key organizations, leading practices. There's some great things going on right now as to how folks are working together, how library folks are working together with their community, plugging into their communities to serve COVID impacted communities.
Great. So last question.
Okay.
It's a topic we've spoken about over the months that we've been in touch about this project. It's made headlines around the country, and that's the stress that's been placed on library workers during the pandemic. You know, many of them have taken on expanded roles. They've often been put in harm's way, sometimes often without proper training, even the proper safety precautions, especially in the beginning of the pandemic. Any message for frontline workers who have struggled so far with this pandemic, and any help that this program might offer them?
Well, first of all, hearing what's going on with people, of course, like many of my colleagues, it's breaking my heart because I've seen what people are going through. I've seen library folks doing more than ever before in the scariest time in my lifetime. They are on the front line serving, and I just can't say how much respect I have for them. As we've talked about this issue, and I've talked about what needs to be done with issues such as this, it really starts at the top with structural change. So at leadership levels, how can we stress to leadership what needs to happen and when? That's not something this program can address, but it's something that I would love to see us as an industry work forward on. There has to be a way, either at a region, a state, or nationally, that we can come together to support our community doing such good work and make it safe for them to be at work.
The program is Libraries as Second Responders. We've been talking with Veranda Pitchford from the Khalifa Group. Veranda, thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, so 2 points that I want to talk about with our panelists now that stick out for me. And this is Veranda's first point, that the libraries that we're going to be coming back to are not the same libraries that we closed in March, right? Post-pandemic, post everything that's going on in this country. So how do we do advocacy work when we have to sort of rebuild the airplane as it's flying? And the other part of this is her point about library workers and their safety, and the need to elevate that to the top, not just to library leaders, but to our political leaders as well. Kathy, I'll ask you to weigh in first.
Well, first of all, I would like to congratulate Veranda for joining the United for Libraries board. We are so excited to have such a powerful advocate working closely with ALA. With regards to safety, I want to remind everybody that the American Library Association worked closely with Senator Reed from Rhode Island and Representative Andy Levin from Michigan to introduce the Library Stabilization Fund Act, which included many provisions that would allow states to allocate funding to purchase PPE, to take care of the needs that they have there in their community, to make sure that the library workers are protected. The health and safety of those folks come first. And we have had a few questions that have come in recently, Andrew, about vaccinations. So I just want to remind folks that this is an important time for you to be connecting the library leaders in your state, to be connecting with your chapter and working with your state officials, because they're going to be the ones that decide the list of prioritization within your state. So it's really important to be engaged now with your chapter and at that state level.
Great. John, any thoughts you want to share?
Well, the CDC guidance, talks about the different tiers for vaccinations, and librarians are mentioned not alongside educators, but in the similar tier. I think it's tier 2B. And we're in tier 1A right now, with Mondays, yesterday being the first vaccination. The need to make sure that you're taken care of. What we're trying to do here at Every Library, in the Every Library Institute, is focus on what we do every day, which is the funding situation for libraries, but in this case, the funding situation for library workers and librarians. The need for mutual aid right now is both heartening, because we can come together as a group of people who care in our sector, in our industry, in our profession, and try and take care of each other a bit. But also, I think that we have to spend a lot of time looking at the economic dislocation that's happening, not just for our communities that we're trying to serve and the families of our school librarians, but the economic dislocation that's happening to the folks who are working in libraries, either because a spouse a housemate, a co-parent has trouble, or they themselves have been left behind either through furloughs or layoffs. We have to address the human condition here. And as Veranda said, that starts at the top. It's important for us to come together with mutual aid, but it's more important for us, I think, to have systems in place for budgeting that focus on the people and a living wage and making people whole again as this moves forward.
Hear, hear. So we're down to our last few minutes here. Kathy, I know we may lose you at 2 o'clock on the dot. Busy times in Washington. So I just want to skip ahead because understandably our discussion today and most of our political discussions are dominated by the COVID-19 crisis. But there's a long list of issues that libraries are vested in. There's privacy and data protections and ebooks and digital content and free speech and anti-censorship and copyright reform. So I just wanted to hear from each of you on what other issues are bubbling up here. Is anything going to happen on any of these issues? There's, of course, things that we're not only playing offense on, but defense on as well. So just in the last few minutes here, what else is going on?
Wow, Andrew, we don't have enough time to get into all of that today, but I can tell you where you can learn more about that. If you haven't registered for ALA's Midwinter Conference, you should definitely do that. We're going to cover some of those topics. The team has put together several great sessions that will really dive into a broad range of library policies that we hope to look at over the next 4 years. So I would encourage people to sign up for the Midwinter Conference if they want to learn more about that and also become engaged. Following us on Twitter is a great way to stay engaged as well. But I really believe, until we get the pandemic under control, folks on the Hill are not going to want to talk about anything else. So I think it's really important, though, that we begin to build those relationships, because when the time does come, when things have settled down, they're going to start to focus back on those policy issues. And it would be great if you've already got a strong relationship with them and you've built up some rapport, because some of the topics that we get into are pretty complex and you can't just address those in a soundbite. So I think it's going to be really important for those that are actually out there in the field to start engaging now and showing the value of libraries, because the depth of what we cover and the issues that we're involved in are tremendous. And to the average staffer on the Hill, they don't really understand that. So it's up to us to help them get educated about what we actually do.
Great. And I want to second that. I spent some time looking at the ALA Midwinter program, and there's great stuff in there. It's a very strong program. So by all means. John, any thoughts you want to share on this?
Well, we're looking to help library leaders address a situation that's pretty dire, which is austerity budgets. In an austerity budget framework, policymakers, politicians, elected officials will look to cut. And we've seen this in the UK in particular, where libraries have been decimated. Well, more than decimated, that's only a few percentage points. They're down to 800 library facilities in the UK because of austerity budgeting that forces a budget crisis. It takes a real leader to not just look at cuts, but to look at efficiencies. And not just within your own organization as a library leader, but across the systems that are in place in your community, whether you're an independent library district or part of a city or a county municipality. But then it takes true courage to move from simply talking about efficiencies and moving into new revenue. If we're not focused as a library community on new revenue in the next 2 years, we're going to be left behind financially. New revenue in the form of local taxes, sure, going out to the voters and asking for a new levy or a referendum. But what about the states that are bringing up things like cannabis and recreational marijuana? What does it look like to have an earmark within other sin taxes, as they call them? What does it look like when we're reworking the situation around education funding, around income tax or wealth taxes, to make sure that school library programs are part of that? If we don't have a focus on new revenue, Andrew, this is all an academic conversation. So what we're looking to be able to do is help support library leaders, folks who understand not only that their bread needs to be buttered, but how to get more butter, if I can say it like that, to be equipped with the right kinds of tools. Advocacy for the sake of advocacy right now, if we don't really break the mold and look at the budgets directly, either at a municipal level or a state level or federally, if we don't look at rewriting the budgets that include librarians, library workers, and library programs in communities and on campuses, that's our great work right now.
Absolutely. More butter. I like it. There's a hashtag there. There's a t-shirt there for sure.
Sure enough.
So look, we're running out of time here today. That's all we have. We should probably do another one of these at some point soon. I want to thank our panelists, Kathy Cromer and John Kraska, both for your work and also for taking the time to join us today. I want to remind our attendees who were here today to please get involved. Reach out to your representatives. Reach out to the ALA and to every library for any help or ideas that you may need. On a personal note, this is our last Library Lounge webinar for 2021. I want to thank all of you who have tuned in. More than 1,600 librarians have registered and taken part in these programs. That's phenomenal. We thank you. I thank you too for your emails and tweets and the kind words you've offered about the programs and guests. These sessions are always archived and available for you to go back and look at and share. And I can report also that, if we were a Netflix show, we've been renewed. So we will be back for a new season starting in February of 2021. So look for more of these sessions coming soon. And by all means, feel free to contact us with topics you'd like to see us address. And finally, stay safe, everyone. Wear a mask. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your communities. Try to enjoy what's surely going to be a tough and a weird holiday season. Please know that better days are ahead. And I want to close the season with a heartfelt thank you to all librarians for the work that you do. It's really an honor for me to work in this field and to serve you. And I look forward to seeing you all in the new year. Take care.